Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squad for boxing news and views from around the internet. Rising Croatian prospect Filip Hrgovic will face a late replacement opponent this weekend in the form of Kevin Kingpin Johnson. Hrgovic was due to face Ytalo Perea, but apparent travel document issues have scuppered that, and Johnson, he's been drafted in at late notice. So I'll get to the press release that's got some comments from Johnson himself and promoter Ytalo Perea, but in general, I actually think this is a much better fight for Hrgovic. When the Perea fight was announced, it really didn't do much for me. I thought actually this feels like they've been trying to get a decent opponent for this December the 8th date in Zagreb, Croatia. They hadn't managed to get someone who they wanted. They had to settle with Perea. And that would have been because they had to run the event, sell tickets, all that sort of stuff. They just had to, at a certain point, pull the trigger and get him in. But now with him pulling out, they've got Kevin Johnson coming in, and I'm sure Johnson is taking a decent little payday for this, coming in at such short notice. He was fighting just last weekend. I'm not actually even sure who he fought last weekend because the result, it's not up on BoxRec, but apparently he got a knockout. But I like this fight for a number of reasons. One being that right now he is facing a number of prospects in the division who are on the rise, so it allows us to get a bit of a yardstick of where guys are at. Daniel Dubois has recently fought him. Peter Milas, a Croatian prospect, he recently fought Johnson and beat him. And now Johnson is going to be facing Filip Hrgovic, who I rate as the #1 prospect in the division right now. So we'll get to the press release and then some other thoughts, because it's worth talking about this yardstick that Hrgovic can get. But in terms of the press release, Filip Hrgovic, 6-0, 5 KOs, has a new opponent set for his heavyweight showdown on Saturday at the KC Drazen Petricevic with former world title challenger Kevin Johnson, 32, 11-1, 16 KOs, replacing Ytalo Perea. Perea was due to arrive in Zagreb on Tuesday, but did not make his scheduled connection from Bogota. Later it became apparent, despite previous assurances, that he did not possess the necessary documents to travel. With no time to spare, the call went out for a suitable replacement, and Johnson, currently based in Germany, where he recorded a knockout win last Saturday, was placed on standby earlier this week and arrived in Zagreb today. Johnson from New Jersey, USA, challenged Vitaly Klitschko for the WBC world title and has since gone on to share the ring with a number of modern heavyweight greats, including Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. "I'm feeling good," said Johnson. "I'm coming off a knockout win last weekend and I'm still in that fighting mood. I'm in great shape and I'm ready to go. I didn't have to think twice when I was offered the fight. Hrgovic doesn't worry me. I've been in there with the best and he's not the best, so why should I worry about him? He's been in training for something completely different, so who knows what's going to happen when we meet in the middle of the ring. It's hard to predict, but if the opportunity for a knockout comes, I'm going to take it. He's going to need all the support he can get come Saturday, because if he doesn't, there's going to be a big upset. And whatever the outcome, one thing's for sure. The fans are going to get their money's worth. I can guarantee that." And then Ytalo is quoted as saying, "Obviously, it's not ideal for Filip to have such a late change of opponent, but due to the circumstances, we were left with no other option. We are, however, delighted to have secured such a high-profile replacement. Kevin Johnson has fought the best out there. He always puts on a great show, and I'm sure the fans at the KC Drazen Petricevic will not be disappointed." And then the rest of the release, details about the card, tickets, all that sort of stuff. So clearly not sold out if they're still talking about tickets. But in terms of the fight, I actually like this fight much better than the previous one, as I mentioned, and it gives us a yardstick. But I'd like to hear that Johnson is saying that he's coming ready, he's coming to fight. I'm sure he will be in shape. Whether that's enough to beat Filip Hrgovic, I have my doubts on that. He is talking it up in terms of upset, knockout, all that sort of stuff, that he's going to, come in there and really give it to Hrgovic. That remains to be seen, because remember, recently against Daniel Dubois, Kevin Johnson looked a shell of his former self, very negative. He didn't come to fight, he came to survive. And I would hate to think that we'd see another repeat of that, because Nissa Sauerland is talking about Kevin Johnson always coming to fight and people are going to get their money's worth. They won't be disappointed and such. But I was certainly disappointed to see Johnson's level of ambition against Daniel Dubois. But I guess when you're facing one of the biggest punches that's coming up in the division, you know, you are going to be negative to some extent because you want to avoid some of those heavy shots. But Johnson these days, really, he is a gun for hire. He takes on these sorts of fights relatively short notice. He fights all the time now, but he is a guy that can make a living in the sport. But he's going to have to actually show something to keep getting these fights, because if he doesn't fight, if he's super negative like in the Dubois fight, he's not going to get many calls. But as a late notice opponent here, I do think that Nissa Sauerland has done a relatively good job, but they've probably had to pay through the nose to get Johnson just to agree to the fight. Because I can't imagine, you know, that he's going to be taking peanuts for this, because the event hinges on Hrgovic having a decent opponent. And this is actually an upgrade from the former guy. But this fight, it allows us to get a bit of a yardstick of where Filip Hrgovic is really at. Johnson recently fought Daniel Dubois. He's recently fought Hrgovic's compatriot Peter Milas. Milas stopped him. That was due to a cut, and Dubois sort of put on a beating of Johnson over 10 rounds. He looked a little bit one-paced, a little bit one-dimensional, but he really did put it on Johnson. But Johnson didn't really come to fight, he came to survive. And Dubois got quite a bit of flack for that. He wasn't able to stop Johnson. There were the comparisons with Anthony Joshua, who blasted Johnson out in a few rounds, and after that fight, some people were calling Dubois a hype job. I guess in terms of Hrgovic, some of the hype that is behind him is nowhere near as big as it is for Daniel Dubois. He's slightly under the radar for especially the casual fan right now. Hardcore boxing fans know that Filip Hrgovic is a talent. He's a guy coming through, silky boxing skills, 26 years old, good amateur pedigree. He's a man on the rise, and we've seen from his first, 6 fights, he's been taking on a lot of competition you don't see guys who are 6-0 facing. I mean, his first fight was Zambano Love. You've also got Tom Little on the record, stopped him. Sean Turner on the record, that was a unanimous decision. Amir Mansour, that was his most recent fight before this Johnson one, and that really was an impressive performance. Sure, Mansour was an older fighter, but he was in shape. Hrgovic did a number on him, and Mansour, his days as a contender or fringe contender, they are pretty much done now after that performance from Hrgovic. So now Hrgovic looking to take out Kevin Johnson in his 7th fight. Dubois fought Johnson in his 9th fight. Milas, I think it was his 11th or 12th fight, something like that. So, Hrgovic is making some good strides in his career, and this is going to be another good resume builder in terms of former title challenger Johnson on the record. But I guess for this fight, maybe the expectations aren't as high on Hrgovic as compared to Dubois. But I expect Hrgovic is going to thoroughly outbox Johnson, pretty much tag him at will. And it'll be interesting to see if Johnson really comes to fight, because if he sort of tucks up again, doesn't do much, well, it might end up being another sort of stinker. And it wouldn't surprise me if he does start to take a beating if he just goes into his shell. But Hrgovic, he can make a statement here, because if he can stop Johnson or beat him in a more impressive fashion than his contemporaries, then obviously that is good for his stock. More people will start talking about Filip Hrgovic. But I guess some of his profile, because he's had a couple of fights in Croatia now, he's a little bit off the beaten track in terms of, some of the casual viewing of him. It's sort of keeping expectations somewhat in check, and maybe we're getting more of an indication of where Filip Hrgovic is really at as compared to the hype surrounding other prospects in the division, because sometimes that hype can override the actual reality of the results and can disguise a couple of flaws in their game. But Hrgovic, there have been questions in the past about his power. He answered some of those in the Amir Mansour fight. He stopped him in 3 rounds. So it'll be interesting to see someone like Johnson, who's very durable, if he can get a stoppage, a stoppage full stop, because Johnson hasn't been stopped very often in his career. It could be a real statement to the rest of the division. But 2019 shapes as a very big year for Hrgovic, and I think he won't have any trouble with Johnson. Johnson, he's talking a big game, but he's coming for the L. Let's face it. But I did wonder with the rest of this event, because Peter Milas, he was originally announced to be on this card. He fellow Croatian to Hrgovic. And that's a fight I would like to see down the line. But I was having a look at the event details, but apparently, for whatever reason, he's been scrapped from the card. Potentially, they couldn't secure an opponent, or an opponent's pulled out. Something has happened here because he's off the card now. And it would have been good to see them on that same card, because down the line, that could be a very good domestic clash. Milas and Hrgovic, obviously they're going to build that rivalry, and that could be a very good fight down the line, both unbeaten at this stage. Milas is a little bit further on in his prospect development phase, but Hrgovic, the way he's going to catch him, and he will be a fully minted contender by about 10 or 12 fights by this rate. But definitely a better fight for Hrgovic for this weekend. I'm actually glad that this Perea guy's had issues with his travel documents, because I'd much rather see this fight for all the reasons I've talked about. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.